Welcome to the DWRDNET Stationery feed with your host, Derek DeWeese. This is a podcast where we talk about all things stationery, be it fountain pens, pencils, typewriters, papers, and more. So sit back and relax and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of the DWRDNET Stationery feed. We're back after a couple weeks off for pen shows, and I'm glad to be recording again. And my guest for today is from a completely different side of the stationery world, with that being typewriters. I want to welcome Richard Polt, who's the author of the Typewriter Revolution, as well as EverType, and he's kind of a fixture in the typewriter community, and I'm really excited about this one. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me.
And so the way I normally have the show is I have some questions that are kind of level setting, because most of my guests up to this point have been more in the fountain pen or things like that. So I've modified the questions slightly. So to start out, when you're not typing, what do you like to write with?
Oh, that's a good question. I like a fountain pen, a very particular model, which is the Pilot Namiki Vanishing Point. So I always have one of those. That's my only working fountain pen. There are a few other broken ones maybe, but I have one of those. Every year or two, I drop it, wreck the nib, and buy a new one.
Do you use the finer nibs, or do you like a broad or medium, something like that?
I like fine, yeah, and blue-black ink. That's my way.
Blue-black, it's a classic combo. What about papers? What do you prefer to write on?
I am not too picky about that, but when I'm writing personal stuff, I have journals, which I've gotten from various sources. There used to be a company called Otterblotter, which seems to be out of business now, but they produced a really nice version of the sort of Moleskine or Leuchtturm style notebook, which was only like $8 a piece. So that's probably why they went out of business. And on the other price end for my journals, there's this company called Epoca. Maybe I am kind of choosy, come to think of it. Epoca, they import handmade, hand-bound, leather-bound journals from Italy, which are made the traditional way, and they're fantastic.
No, I've heard of Epica. That's one that I believe I've tried at some point. I think someone had one at Pen Club or something like that. But, in the stationery world, that's the good thing. You can get what works for you. You can get the high end. You can get the cheap, whatever works. And that's the kind of the fun thing. But the other question that's related to papers, what do you prefer to type on? Do you like to type in A4, A5, anything, a variety?
I usually, this is where I'm really not choosy. I usually just use 8.5 by 11 copy paper. Works fine. Sometimes I'll play around. I did find some neat stationery, which has some family meaning for me. So Southworth is a paper company that was independent for many years. Now it's part of a larger paper company. It was founded by my great-great-great-great-grandfather, one of them, back in the 19th century. And it was also the first company to especially produce paper meant for typewriters in the 1870s. So it's neat. And I found this 1940s box of wonderful airmail stationery with this lightning design. So I've used some of that. So sometimes I'll find some really cool paper that I use for letters.
No, very neat. And that's where, as I've been getting into typewriters, I've been using my Japanese papers and the stationery papers and seeing how well they type. So now I don't just try out an ink on a paper and then try the different typewriters on the paper. So I have kind of a reference of, I'm sending a letter to somebody. I want it to look like this, so I can kind of reflect or look back and have a reference. And as I have some new ink or new ribbon colors coming, that'll be an addition to that. My final kind of intro question, and this is a favorite and that I love asking people, what's your favorite stationery adjacent item? And by that, it's normally like a messenger bag, a lap desk, a book weight, something like that, something you use all the time that's not a pen, paper, ink, or in your case, a typewriter.
That's a good question. I guess something that comes to mind is this Ace Liner stapler. These are very common, but I think they just have a very nice kind of streamlined shape, and you can also find a matching staple remover. So there's one thing.
That's great. That's something in my local stationery shop. He got in some Japanese staplers. So there's always the special version of whatever that, you can find for the fit. But
do you know those gadgets? I think they're kind of popular in Japan. They don't use staplers, but they cut a hole in the paper and then they stick a little slot of paper through the.
Yeah, the little paper folding thing. And then there's the little um, like brass or copper page markers and whatnot. It's Japanese stationery is a whole nother world of, intrigue if you really dig into it, because they have just a different approach to doing some things we would consider basic, and for them that's their normal. It's fun to kind of delve in and find the differences and what you really like using.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something I know much about, but I know that Japan is a really paper worshiping culture. And I hear that they still love faxes, for one thing, because it's kind of easier to just write Japanese characters by hand, but also because it gives you a sheet of paper on the other end.
Yeah, another store that I frequent, she just was in Japan for 3 weeks last year doing some shows and, meeting vendors and whatnot. And it's like you go to the department store there, the grocery store, and there's still a wall of stationery.
Mm.
Every store had their own version. It's didn't matter where you went, the ring bound or whatever, because that's just so culturally ingrained there that I kind of like it. I wish we we had more paper on this side versus what
Yeah,
we do.
that sounds wonderful. This conversation is already bringing out my inner stationery fanatic. So just thinking of how much I love walking into a shop with all this blank paper that promises so many possibilities.
Yeah, it's the paper, the pens, the what can you do with it? Because that's how I kind of view vintage pens or now vintage typewriters. And that was something as I was reading Typewriter Revolution, which we'll get into. One of the little comics you had in there of, it's like, oh, this author wrote this book on it. This author did this, and then at the last one is like, I'll sell it to you for $5, or if you buy the garden gnome in the background, I'll give you the typewriter for free. It's like, what did these things do in their past? These tools that are, going to outlive us all. What did they do, and how they are now getting a second life through people like you being evangelists of the typewriters and kind of bringing it back around. In regards to that, you're a well-known name in the world of typewriters, but your typewriter website, the classic typewriter page, it's been around since 1995, so early internet. So looking back, how does it feel to have been having and providing such a great resource for so long and have helped so many people over all that time?
Well, it feels good. When I first learned about the World Wide Web, I just felt excited in this vague way that, oh, this has potential, which was an understatement. So before that, I was, vaguely aware of the internet, and I'd done a few things online, but as you know, it was kind of awkward, and you needed to learn all this arcane stuff, and it was all text based and so on. And it had vaguely occurred to me, what if you could interact on the internet like you interact on a Macintosh or something? Well, okay, so then there was the web, and so pretty soon I got the idea. I'd been collecting typewriters for about a year, and I thought, this could be a web page. So I learned basic HTML and put something up. Initially, part of my main motivation was to provide a forum where people could buy and sell antique typewriters. This was before eBay, and that didn't last very long. I was accepting, classified ads by email and putting them up. Um, but it's served many purposes over the years, and right now, the parts that get used the most, I think, are the collection of manuals, users' manuals that people have generally sent to me, and I've put up. Or there's a list of typewriter repair shops that I try to keep up to date, and you'd be amazed by how many people are still practicing that craft, especially in the U.S.
No, and that's actually how I stumbled across, your site and the Typewriter Revolution I bought my first typewriter. Okay, is this working right? It seems like it is, but I want to know more. Is there a manual that exists? And then you kind of go down that rabbit hole of, wait, here's this whole thing. And then in my case, I ran into friends who I already knew through the pen world that we hadn't really talked about typewriters, but there were more of them there than I realized. And that's what kind of encouraged me to get into it more and, integrate it, because people already were using it, just nobody was talking about it on the true stationary fountain pen side. And why not? It's another tool to have in your arsenal, and that's why I really kind of like digging into it. So, with typewriters being its own subset of like this larger stationary hobby, how have you seen the typewriter collecting and just use change from when you started, in the mid 90s to now? How, the ebbs and flows, or how have you seen it grow? Are you seeing a newer generation coming in every so many years? Just kind of talk how you've seen that since you've been a fixture in the world for so long.
Yeah. Well, for many years before my time, typewriter collecting was a very, very niche thing. because for most people, a typewriter is just an everyday, utility thing. They didn't see it as intrinsically valuable. It was just a tool. But there were a few people who were interested in the history of them and got fascinated and built up these collections through, they had to do a lot of, it took a lot of shoe leather back then before the internet and a lot of classified ads in papers and so on. But it was a very small thing. And they focused on the really early typewriters, preferably 19th century machines. The rarer and weirder, the better. And when I kind of learned of this whole world in 1994, that's what initially excited me too, because I thought, well, the typical old typewriter is like a boxy black Underwood thing. I don't care about it. But these early ones, they're so weird. I want those. But in the early 2000s, I, and along with quite a few others, got more interested in mid-century portable typewriters, and some that were actually more common but hadn't gotten much attention from the collectible side of things. So that's when I discovered a lot of machines from West Germany, for instance, that were really well made. And as the 21st century went on, I got wind of more and more people kind of deliberately choosing to use typewriters. And in 2010, I started a blog, which was included typecasting, as we say. So, you take a picture or you scan your typewriting and you put it up on your blog, which seems kind of silly, but it was fun. And it felt sort of transgressive too. Like, this is such a strange way to do things in the year 2010. And I'm doing something here. I'm fighting back against the norm. So that became a new wave, I guess, of people, including young people who had never encountered typewriters before, kind of taking it up as a countercultural thing, which was fun, but also had an element of rebellion to it, which I then tried to describe in my book.
No, and I just finished reading the book. I had it and I was, browsing through, but then the last couple of weeks, having been at pen shows, you think, oh, I'm going to take my book with me. I'm going to read it. I'm going to do all this stuff. And then it all stays in the bag because you're tied up in what you're doing. But I do kind of like the analog, because that's something I've been really focused on as I've gone down this YouTube and stationery journey, kind of coming back into it after a couple year hiatus, is less screen time, more tactile, more getting back to things like that, which I really appreciate. And the typewriter's been a good addition down that route. Um, but in terms of the Typewriter Manifesto, which is part of the book, talk about how that came to be, because you're talking about, the younger generation you saw coming in with a little bit of the rebellion and just kind of having someone to put it out there. Here's kind of a battle cry of sorts for people who like this hobby and want to find out more about it.
Yeah, I'd been blogging by typewriter for about 2 years and had gotten to know things that were going on in the community, and this spirit of rebellion kind of grew and grew. And then one day, in about half an hour, this text came to me, which is in my book, and people can find on my website, typewriterrevolution.com. Which is it's a slightly tongue-in-cheek, but not false statement of rebellion. We assert our right to resist the paradigm, to rebel against the information regime, to escape the data stream. We strike a blow for self-reliance, privacy, and coherence against dependency, surveillance, and disintegration. We affirm the written word and written thought against multimedia, multitasking, and the meme. We choose the real over representation, the physical over the digital, the durable over the unsustainable, the self-sufficient over the efficient. So I was just trying to express, what might be common to all these different people who are playing around with typewriters. Well, they're not digital. They're choosing to do something in a non-digital way when they didn't have to. And why is that? I think since then, it's just been borne out in the experience of most of us that these are real problems: a lack of privacy, dependence, addiction to these things, distraction. And not that everybody should pick up a typewriter, but it's one way to resist a little.
No, and that makes sense. It's, because I think differently when I sit down at the typewriter, or, if I'm sitting down, because I've started doing journaling through typing. So I'll type out a page and stick it in the journal page. So then I have every few pages might be typed from a different typewriter, might be handwritten from a different fountain pen. It's just a different way of thinking that, I work in IT. So the last thing I want to do at the end of the day is look at another screen, but I want to get something down. And, that for me has been an interesting way to kind of merge the two things together. It makes me use the typewriters I've been acquiring at a rapid pace in a pretty short amount of time, but then it also is putting it, so I'm doing something with it, or writing letters and things like that, just that tactile nature. Because I'm of the 1980 was when I was born. So when I was getting to school paper time, we had an Apple computer. So I had never actually did the typewriter. I was right at the edge of typewriter to computer, and we owned a typewriter, but I think at that time, my mom thought, "Oh, I would probably just use it as a toy and didn't use it." I now own that typewriter, which was an Olivetti Studio 44, which is kind of cool to, come full circle to get a kind of quirky, really, or I guess sought after in some circles typewriter that was there all along. But at what point did you decide, okay, been doing the blog, been doing the the manifesto? When did the idea for the book come to be, and kind of an entry guide for someone who was curious, who wanted to go to a bookstore and find a physical book or order it online to read through, how they can get involved and learn more about this hobby?
So the book grew directly out of the manifesto because the manifesto was received pretty well. People started reposting it, retyping it, translating it into various languages, and I thought, this could be the beginning of something. It's sort of like my feeling when I learned about the World Wide Web. This has potential. So I would say to people, whenever you get that inner feeling that this has potential, you need to explore it. So I wanted to create a book that would kind of expand on the manifesto and nuance it, and also report on all the interesting things I'd heard people were doing around the so-called typosphere, creative writing projects, typewriters as the basis for social life, type-ins were becoming a thing, art projects, visual art, musical art, typewriters as works of art, and this would all be kind of threaded together with the idea that it's part of a rebellion against the digital machine. The manifesto needed a little nuancing because we're not all, strict Luddites or Amish or something. A lot of us are like you. We work with digital technology every day and we appreciate it. But I don't know how many times I've heard almost verbatim what you said a minute ago. I work in IT all day and then I need a break. And my typewriter is one way to give me that. So the book was a matter of stitching together a lot of things I'd picked up. It was my first nonfiction kind of reporting book. I'd written philosophy books before that, and it was a lot of fun. And managed to find an agent and get it out there. Oh,
No,
another
and
thing I wanted to include was just practical advice on, do you want to join this movement? How do you do that? What's a good typewriter? What do you need to look for? How do you use it?
no, and having just finished reading it, it is a great for people who are not tinkerers and they didn't, they want a one-stop shop versus, hopping into the internet as a whole to research all the different aspects. Because that's how I came through it. I was like, oh, I want to learn more about this. I want to learn more about this. And then I see the book. I was like, man, this would have been much easier to start here and go through all of that. So definitely a great way to kind of introduce somebody, because I believe there's a lot of curiosity around typewriters. I was in an event my wife was doing some book stuff at, and there was an empty spot. It was a sci-fi convention, an empty spot of a table. That was the only place, and I had my Skywriter with me. And I sat down. I was like, oh, I have some letters to return in February because it was the novel writing month. In 45 minutes, I had 23 people come up and ask about the typewriter. Either they'd never seen one, what was I doing, why a typewriter? I put a couple sheets in and let people type for the first time on one. And most of them, they didn't know you had to commit to the keys. So that wasn't even striking because they're trying to do it like a keyboard. And that was just interesting. And that's where kind of like you said, this has some teeth. Okay, maybe I add this into the YouTube because it is a tool I'm using, and there's curiosity about it. And you never know how someone's going to they'll find something like that they might find appealing or add in. But you had the Typewriter Revolution, and then not long ago, fairly recently, you did your first fiction book, Evertype. So how did that come to be? Adding the storytelling aspect, and I own it, but I've not yet gotten a chance to read it. So talk about the fiction side of the writing.
Sure. Yeah. Here's the book. This is self-published under my own publishing company called Loose Dog Press, which, if you learn about typewriter escapements, you realize it's a very nerdy pun. This actually had its seed early in my joining of the typosphere, or the world of typewriter blogs, which I did in 2010. And I had tried National Novel Writing Month a couple of times before and never got beyond maybe 20 pages. But this time I felt determined I was going to do something because there was more of a community aspect of it. The typewriter brigade, people who tried to do it by typewriter, and some people were reading my blog, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do this, and every day I would put up scans of my daily typing, like 3 pages of typing, and that created extra, salutary pressure to pump it out, and I did. It was very satisfying. I wrote the requisite circa 50,000 words in 30 days. And then I set it aside. And 10 years later, it's a very different time, 2020, with everything that was going on then. And I found it to be a very extremely stressful year. And at the end of that year, and this was exactly 10 years after I had ended that story, I thought, I'm going to do a part 2. And I soon realized, oh, wow, part 1 it was just half a story. It was extremely incomplete. So basically, the novel was drafted in 2 months, 10 years apart. And then I spent a few years, going back to it off and on and thinking, maybe I can really make this something that's worth publishing and polishing it and so on. And I found an excellent artist, Trent Recker, who did the cover as well as inside illustrations, which are fantastic. So I think it came out very nicely in terms of how it looks. Agents weren't interested in touching it, so I had to put it out myself. But I'm very happy that I did.
No, I'm glad you put it out there because there's a whole subset of people who that's up there. For me, I find rabbit holes. Right now, it's typewriters and stationery, and I want to find everything I can. I want to learn. I want to read. I want to encompass, and it's good to have something like that that's on the fiction side, because that might encourage other people. Oh, maybe I should write something, even if they're not going to do anything with it. Just the activity of doing, putting their
Yeah,
hands on a typewriter and doing something versus
yeah,
playing a game or something. It's gives um it just encourages people to explore and try things, which I find necessary these days. It's just something that I think a lot of people are losing track of. And there's enough people now, especially I've noticed with younger people, they never had that analog that we grew up with. And they're kind of wanting to go back to it or find out and give it a try now that they never got to experience that like we had to adapt to the digital, they're now wanting to adapt to the analog, which I think is a good juxtaposition of kind of how that works. And it has its purpose.
yeah, yeah. That's a really healthy trend, and I think right now, especially due to generative AI, we have to value process over product. The
No, and
process of
yeah.
writing something has got to be more important than the final text and whether anybody reads it or not, because the computer can make the final text in 5 seconds. But the joy of writing is the writing.
No, and this is timely because the article just came out about the Cornell professor who has their students using typewriters to help make sure that they're writing their work and not AI, which, that's been around all the typewriter social media, Facebook groups or whatnot. People keep sharing that, but hopefully that does the same thing. That's going to direct people to, typewriters, that's still a thing. And maybe that'll bring more people into the fold who, it hadn't been a thought, it hadn't crossed their mind. It's something they might have seen being used in a movie, but they're like, wait, I can go buy one of those? Because think about the trend of all the stores that are popping up. Younger people who are making stores, like we have National Typewriter now, there's Typewriter Chicago, there's other stores that are opening up, led by that younger generation. And that means that these typewriters are going to carry on and get that second life going forward through, whatever path they end up taking.
Yeah, that really makes me happy. And actually, the compliment to Evertype that I've received that has made me happiest was from a reader who said, "Well, this book inspired me to start a typewriter repair business on the side." So great. I feel its purpose was achieved. And
That's great.
I've corresponded with that Cornell German professor in the past. Her name is Grit Phelps, and she puts out these typewriters. I think a lot of them have German keyboards for her students to practice writing, and it's successful. And so other professors and teachers at various levels have found that kids and young people generally are very curious about these things, and they get some benefit from them. And actually, another thing that I've published through Loose Dog Press is called Human Teaching by Chris Osmond, and people can check it out at loosedogpress.blogspot.com. He's a professor of education, and he talks about many things in that book, including his own practice of sharing typewriters with students.
No, I would definitely have that in the show notes with the link to that and all the other links we've talked about. Because it's just, like I said, it's a great way for someone to spend some time just reading about, even if they don't end up buying a typewriter, they might find something useful to apply in a different way of just, taking that leap or doing something more analog. So
Yeah.
you go through a lot of it in the Typewriter Revolution, but it's been a few years since that was released. What advice do you have for someone now? Like, day one, they just might be seeing this or they see a typewriter. What would you add in addition to read the book? Because it has a lot of the good information in there. But what is something you like if you were going to do a revised edition that you might add in there for someone new who wants to get into the world of typewriters in 2026?
So, yeah, I've thought about things I would like to add if there were ever a revised edition. They just put out a second printing, which I'm very happy about, but they didn't give me a chance to change the text. But I don't think I would change anything essential. I would correct a handful of errors and, report on some activities that have happened in the last 10 years. For instance, there's a thing called QWERTY Fest Milwaukee, which is fantastic. It's a multi-day typewriter festival. Hundreds of people show up for this. And there's typewriter music, there's typewriter parties, there's typewriter competitions and sales and just goofy fun. That's like one of the best things that's happened. But it's all in the spirit of what I saw happening 10 years ago. It's just grown. So I think my prediction came true. My prediction was this is not a fad. Like, when is the last time you heard people talking about hipsters? I really don't hear about hipsters anymore. But in 2015, many people thought typewriters, that's one of those hipster things. Meaning that's just an affectation and a phony, way of trying to get attention. Like that's a bad thing. And I predicted, no, this is not a fad. That maybe hipsters are a fad, as they turned out to be. But typewriters are going to be a thing as long as computers are a thing, because you need some resistance, the historical dialectic, if you will, at work. So I think the basic advice is still valid there. Where to look, educate yourself on eBay, but hopefully buy local. If you can find a local typewriter shop, or maybe there's a local club if you're lucky, or you can go to a Facebook group, find people in your area and just put your hands on these machines and see what speaks to you.
No, and it's funny you mentioned QWERTY Fest because in a roundabout way that led me down the finding typewriters to see if they work or maybe do need to do some repair. The typewriter shop in Nashville is about an hour and a half from my house. I drove out there one day. It looked like, oh yeah, it's hours are going to be open. And I get there, and of any place having a typed letter on the door saying, "Hey, we're closed. We're at QWERTY Fest."
Mm.
And I tend to get one of those, impatient. So I go look on Facebook Marketplace, which led me to finding my first typewriter, the Royal KMM, and then now 14 more later in a matter of months. But that was kind of a weird roundabout way to approach it because, I'm going to go to the store, but man, I really want to play with a typewriter now. So let me go see what my other options are. And then, I started doing the research after the fact, but that's something I have on the list of wanting to attend at some point in the future. Let's see
Yeah, well, I hope it continues for many years, because so far it's been really creative and fun.
So, and that does kind of lead in talking about like that community type events. You recently announced through your blog that you're going to be selling off some of your collection. And as part of that, you're also going to be hosting a swap meet in Cincinnati. So kind of talk through that and how you decided that it's time to, send some of your machines to new homes to find their, I guess their third, potentially fourth or more life. And then about how the swap meet will work. And, we'll put links in as well, but kind of talk through that since that is coming up here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that will be on May 2nd. So at my peak, I had about 300 typewriters. And then I decided, okay, I need to, gradually give these away. So over years, I got it down to about 200. Meanwhile, I'm volunteering for this nonprofit here in Cincinnati called Wordplay Cincy, which does creative writing programs for kids. And I raise funds for them by repairing typewriters for the community and sometimes selling them. So this way, I've acquired another 100 typewriters because people donate, junkers or things for restoration to Wordplay. And so they're sitting in my basement now as parts machines. So here I am again with 300 typewriters. And uh, I'm 61, so I'm heading towards old age. And I have this model in mind, unfortunately, of a German collector about 10 years ago who was just a couple of years older than I am and, fell dead of a heart attack in his front yard. And in his finished basement on his shelves were 1,000 typewriters. And his poor son spent the next 2 years as a full-time job creating a website, documenting all these things, advertising them, shipping them. And I bought a few. He did, a perfectly German job of correctly packaging these things. He did everything right, but I don't want to lay that burden on my wife or my son. So my goal is by the time I die, it's going to be a dozen typewriters max. There are a few that I would never sell. So my goal is to sell about 3/4 of my collection now. I think that would literally stop recurring nightmares that I have about dealing with tons of antique iron. So I've enjoyed all these things. I've learned from them all. I love them all in their way, but I don't want to be greedy, especially when a lot of them are just in their cases in my basement. What's the point? And selling them online on eBay or something is a lot of hassle. It's expensive. It's risky to the typewriters. And so I figured, well, I'm in the Midwest. It's pretty centrally located. Let's just get people to come here. So I'm soon going to be sending out a spreadsheet with my collection, and then the swap meet will overlap with that. So there'll be some unsold machines from my collection, and then anybody is welcome to come and let me know about a week in advance and sell their own typewriter. So that'll be in the Wordplay parking lot in Cincinnati.
No, and we'll have that information of how, if someone's interested. That's why we tried to get this recorded before that was happening. We'll have the information in the notes if you want to reach out to Richard to get on the email list to see, that might be your first typewriter. That might be your 45th typewriter. Who knows? Because he's teased a couple of the ones that are getting sold, but it's not the full list. So on the April 11th, that email will go out, and that'll be interesting to see because I know I've seen people talking about it. There's a lot of people anxious to see what's going to be up there, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly, they sell for you. And then, kind of the impromptu gathering, which, since you're volunteering with Wordplay, turning that into another event to help that organization, it seems like it's a win-win across the board, getting people together to talk about a hobby they enjoy while also, benefiting a nonprofit. So it's a great thing because I plan on coming up for it. Even if I don't get anything, I was like, that sounds interesting. I've got the weekend free and some hotel points. Why not? It's that kind of interesting, quirky thing. I just went to 2 pen shows and I had the thought, wait, that's going to be kind of like a mini typewriter show of sorts. So why not? Fun weekend.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of interest. We'll see. I hope we don't overflow the parking lot, but we'll give it a try. It's always fun to meet other people who share this interest. And the community of typewriter collectors and users is just really diverse. There's no predicting. There are more men than women for sure, but not exclusively. And, we tend to be interested in writing and in technology. So it's the overlap of those things. But other than that, it's liberals, conservatives, young, old, straight, queer, you mention it. So it's been a great opportunity for me to meet people I just would never have met otherwise.
No, definitely. You're not wrong. And that's kind of like the stationery, the fountain pen world. It's so diverse because it goes down to that common people who like to record their thoughts using something that makes them happy as they do it. A nice pen, a nice paper, a nice typewriter, a certain color ribbon. You can really customize with whatever it is for something that you're going to be doing anyway. Why not make it fun at the same time? So as we're wrapping up, the last question that I leave for everybody is what's next for the store company? So what's next for Richard and the Typewriter Revolution?
Well, I'm not sure. Some people have said that they like my novel and I should write more fiction. So I might try that. Or there's another thing that we did through Loose Dog Press. A couple of collaborators and I, we edited a series of anthologies, which kind of tried to hook typewriter lovers on various levels and get them to do what you were talking about, which is actually engage in the writing process. So these are themed collections with clever titles, like, for instance, Margin Releases is about stories about transgressing the boundaries. Um, so people had to write a story or a poem or do some art. Um, each submission had to involve a typewriter in some way, and then the texts, if they were accepted, had to actually be typed with a typewriter. So these books do not contain any digital fonts. It's all just scans of typewriting, which I then had to go and with Photoshop correct all the typos. But so these are very labor intensive. But a lot of people, it was their first publication, and a lot of the submissions were fantastic stories. So um, they're a fun thing to, I think, to inspire people. And we quit a few years ago, but we might do another volume.
Well, you've got a whole fresh crop of people who are getting into this hobby. So, because
Yeah,
that's the first I've heard about that. So I was like, oh, that sounds interesting, you know. So maybe it is time to bring that out, kind of like it, you know, EverType set for 10 years, you said, and then you brought it back and it became a popular book. So maybe it's time for another anthology to come out, to get the next wave of people in. Maybe even add a little thing of people who buy your machines, do a special anthology of works written off machines that you sold. That would be a fun little take, you know, to add in just as a kind of quirky thing, even if it was just something on the website. Scans
yeah,
of you know, that, like we're talking about the next life for the typewriter. You can see what became of those machines that you owned and you've sent off to new homes to find their new purpose.
that
So
would be really touching, actually. Yeah,
yeah, it'd be a neat way to bring it all together and show that, you know, you sold the machines to somewhere where they're getting used and appreciated like they should be. Because even with some of mine, I'm new to it, but there's a couple that I'm going to be bringing with me just to see if I can sell because they're not ones I go to now. Because now that I'm in it a little bit more, I know what I prefer, not what was a good deal at the time. So it's that kind of thing of finding the right variety so that it's something I want to use. I don't, if I own it, I want to make sure it's in the rotation and I'm actually using it, not taking up shelf space because I've got enough pins that are already doing that. Because that's a, you know, it's a lot harder to store a bunch of typewriters than it is a bunch of pins. But
yeah,
Richard, I
that's
appreciate,
a healthy rule. Yeah.
yeah. No, Richard, I appreciate you taking some time tonight. This was fun. I was looking forward to this. And, you know, it was timing how it worked out, you know, sending a message about the postcards you were sending out with the cool little thing and then saying, wait, Richard might be an interesting guest. And, you know, we were able to get this worked out. So I appreciate you taking some time just to talk through all of this. And, you know, if you're listening, definitely check out the notes with the information for all the websites for Richard's books, the swap meet, the meetup, and everything else. Any final words before we call this a wrap, Richard?
Keep on typing, and to quote the Boston Typewriter Orchestra, the revolution will be typewritten.
Perfect way to end it. I appreciate you watching. I'll catch you on the next episode.